that right? Dream Theater Distance Over Time is the band's 14th studio album and is produced by John Petrucci and mixed by Ben Grossi, and features 10 tracks of pure progressive metal out on standard and deluxe CD editions, vinyl, and also HD and streaming services. The first 3 tracks on Distance Over Time are quite solid additions into Dream Theater's extensive catalogue of music by this point, and Untethered Angel is a fantastic opener for this album and features a lot of the hallmarks, trademarks of Dream Theater sound that we've come to love over the years, featuring a really cool clean arpeggiated guitar line in the intro, which is very reminiscent of On the Backs of Angels, and then it moves into a lot of really cool technically driven unison runs from the band before really hitting a really cool catchy chorus. Paralyze is one of the more accessible tracks on this album that definitely has a single feel to it. An excellent groove is present in this song as well that should definitely get the crowd moving on Dream Theater's next batch of tour dates. As well as that too, there's not an over-reliance of vocal effects in the production side of this song. James LaBrie's voice is just right up the front of the mix here, and he really delivers an excellent vocal performance on this track. Fall Into the Light is one of the many tracks on this album where Dream Theater get to explore more of their metal side, and really features a really cool Metallica influenced opening riff from John Petrucci.
So metal.
Before moving into some excellent drum work from Mike Mangini. There's a really cool snare fill that debuts right before the first verse of this song, and then there's also an excellent chorus in this song as well, where there's a lot of great work from Jordan Rudess on this song, and he really thickens the chorus up with some excellent piano and really thick strings as well. In fact, Jordan Rudess's tones on this album have never sounded better, and there's also some great unison runs that tail out this song. Fall Into the Light is definitely one of the highlights. Buster Warrior has a classic DT sort of vibe to it, a great instrumental opening, pretty good vocal performance here from James LaBrie, and also a really cool Ionian inspired guitar riff from John Petrucci. There's also some melodies and chord progressions that are almost reminiscent of Dream Theater's track About to Crash, which featured on the album 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. Now, Dream Theater are always known for putting Easter eggs in their albums, so I'm not quite sure if this was an intentional thing or not, but nonetheless, it was really cool to hear that in this track. This is definitely an album that explores more of the metal side of Dream Theater, so if you're a fan of albums like Train of Thought from 2003, for example, you're really going to find a lot here to enjoy, as is evidenced on tracks like Room 237, which really feature a lot of crushing riffs from John Petrucci and some excellent guitar solos. The metal side to this album definitely has a lot of weight to it this time around. Unfortunately, the album is also plagued by a few strange moments. It's really cool to hear Ma Young's bass playing so prominent in the mix, and particularly with an intro like S29 where his bass playing is right up the front. Unfortunately, Mike Mangini really delivers some complex, rhythmically confusing drumming throughout this song, and the song really goes through a lot of different tempo changes and also rhythmic ideas. The song's never really afforded the opportunity to breathe, and unfortunately tracks like that fall a little bit flat. Pale Blue Dot has some interesting moments and ideas, and the song really has some excellent instrumental sections going on there, but unfortunately the songwriting isn't quite there on that track to really provide a lasting impact. Viper King is the bonus track which comes with the deluxe edition of the album, and it's kind of like if Deep Purple were just a little bit more heavier and created music with odd time signatures. It's a fun track, I really enjoyed that one. Now look, it's a little bit redundant to discuss the performances of a band like Dream Theater, but I'm going to do it anyway. Mangini, Ma Young, Petrucci, and Rudess are the best of the best. They are incredibly gifted musicians, guys, and before this album, before the last album, and even before the album before that, these guys have all proven in the music industry that they are some of the best of the best. It's really cool to hear at this point in their career, though, they're still bringing their A game. It's really obvious that there's a lot of passion in their performances here on this album, and a lot of passion, a lot of good vibes, and I think after 7 years of this incarnation of Dream Theater and this particular lineup, they're finally starting to sound like a much tighter unit, I think, than previous albums. Now, James LaBrie is certainly a vocalist that has divided Dream Theater's fan base over the years. I think you can take it or leave it, but it's one of those things where it's impossible to deny that James LaBrie is a talented singer. to remember complex melodies and phrasings, to remember the complex structure of some of Dream Theater's music without any prompts on stage whatsoever. He doesn't use a teleprompter, he doesn't use any iPads or anything like that. I think that's to be commended as well. He also had a rough history, of course, with the food poisoning incident on the Awake tour where he ruptured his vocal cords. The doctors ordered him to take a break. He didn't. He went out and he committed to an extensive touring schedule straight after that. And Dream Theater have always been known to do long shows as well. So there was a time where these guys were pulling 3-hour plus shows every night. Unfortunately, the extensive touring schedule, the long runtime between shows, and the lack of vocal rest have really started to take an impact on the quality of James LaBrie's voice. And it's really evidenced in live shows where he's a little bit hit and miss between each tour and between these shows. But Distance Over Time really proves that he can still cut it quite well in the studio. And he's still got most of his vocal range as evidenced on this album here. Though what he is starting to do, and it's a particular technique that a lot of singers start to use, is he's starting to use more of a nasal quality in his voice in order to reach some of the higher notes in his register. Paralyzed, At Wit's End, and Out of Time are really great vocal performances from James LaBrie on this album, and he really showcases his excellent breathy quality on some of Dream Theater's softer tracks, and his mid-range sounds absolutely excellent on this album. The Portnoy versus Mangini debate, I think, is something that's going to continue as long as Dream Theater are an active band in the industry. There's certainly no denying that both drummers are incredibly gifted and the best of the best. Outside of DT, I've really loved Portnoy's work with Flying Colours, Transatlantic and the Winery Dogs and Sons of Apollo, and Mangini's work with Steve Vai, Extreme and LaBrie's solo band, and also his work with Annihilation is absolutely stellar. When you are starting to deal with players of this particular level, okay, it really just comes down to what you like in drumming. I think Mangini does a really proficient job at playing a lot of Dream Theater's music, but he does have different instincts and sensibilities to his playing as compared with Portnoy. These drummers are similar in some ways, but completely different in others. And after a lot of thought, I believe this is what it comes down to. Portnoy is more interested in creating a groove within the technical wizardry of Dream Theater, and I think Mike Mangini is more interested in pushing the technical wizardry inside the groove of Dream Theater's music, and I think that's where the difference lies between these two drummers. But I've said this before and I'll say it again, when you replace a band member, when you take a band member out and you put a new band member in, the band changes somewhat. It depends how big an element that particular member was as to how much the band does change. In Dream Theater's case, Portnoy was a very big element and a really huge driving force of Dream Theater. In many ways, the band was his baby. In Dream Theater's case, they're not just changing who plays drums behind the kit. They've also lost somebody who co-produced a lot of their albums, and they've also lost a chief songwriter and driving force for Dream Theater. And so that's a hard position for Mangini to be into, and for the band as well. But it's really evidence post Black Clouds and Silver Linings, which I like to call the Mangini era now. It's definitely affected the band's work post that album, as the sole production duties have now shifted to John Petrucci. After a few albums, Petrucci's production, gosh that's hard to say, it's probably the most consistent here without his longtime friend in the studio, Mike Portnoy. A problem with the Mangini era has been a noticeable drop-off in the sound of the drums. Now, while not quite achieving the excellent drum sound that was prominent on a lot of the Portnoy era albums, here Petrucci does a much better job of capturing Mangini's snare, and his snare sounds quite good here, and the cymbals aren't quite as washy as what has been a problem with some of the band's output since the Mangini era. And here the mixes work quite well, and this better drum sound really gives a lot more space to some of the other instruments to sit better in the mix. Petrucci's guitar tone is absolutely gorgeous. Myung sits quite well in the mix, and he can be heard very prominently throughout the album as well. Jordan Rudess's tones here have never sounded thicker and fuller, as I mentioned earlier in this review. The only thing here that I didn't quite like was some of James LaBrie's vocal production here. Some of his voice does get lost within some of the reverb, chorus and phasing effects that's been used on the album here. As with a lot of these albums, there is an overabundance of compression, unfortunately, in the mastering stage of this album. So it's not quite brick wall, but I would have liked a little bit more dynamic range on some of these tracks here. A few more peaks and valleys is always cool within music, I always say. Still, it's the best sounding album of the Mangini era, and look, I'll go further than that to say that I think it's the best album of the Mangini era of Dream Theater. It doesn't quite hit the highs of some of the band's best work, like Images and Words, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, or Scenes from a Memory. They're some of my favorites. But I think it's just down to the quality of the songwriting. There's still a few strange moments on this album that I think are left over from some of the songwriting sessions of The Astonishing. Dream Theater have made a quality album here, guys, and I think if you're one of the fans that's been sitting on the fence whether or not to pick this album up due to some of Dream Theater's recent efforts, not too sure about it, I think you should definitely check this one out. There's a lot here to enjoy. I'm gonna give Dream Theater Distance Over Time a B+. So guys, what are your thoughts on the new album? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, if you dug this review, guys, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out a great deal. More reviews and videos coming soon, guys. Until next time, guys, don't forget, support the artist, buy the music. Rock on.